The rope snapped taut with a sickening finality as Josephine Daniels watched her husband's body swing beneath the old oak tree, her screams drowned out by the cheering crowd that had gathered for the spectacle. Arizona Territory, 1878, a place where justice was swift, brutal, and often misguided. Thomas Daniels, hanged by the neck until dead for the theft of cattle and murder of Ezra Collins, the sheriff announced, his voice carrying over the dusty town square of Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory. His next words hit Josephine like a physical blow. As per territorial law, his widow and property will be auctioned to pay his debts. Josephine's knees buckled, but the rough hands of the deputy sheriff kept her upright. At 24, she had been married to Thomas for just 3 years, 3 difficult years filled with his drinking, gambling, and increasingly violent outbursts. Though she had not loved him in the end, she had never wished him dead. More importantly, she had never imagined that his death would lead to her own sale like a piece of property. "The auction will commence tomorrow at noon," the sheriff continued. "Until then, Mrs. Daniels will remain in custody." Josephine spent that night in a small cell adjacent to the jailhouse, her thoughts racing between disbelief, grief, and terror. She knew Thomas had debts, gambling losses to men across 3 counties, but she had no idea that territorial law allowed for the auctioning of widows to pay such debts. She had heard whispered stories of such practices in remote territories, but never believed they would touch her life. By dawn, word of the auction had spread throughout Fort McDowell and the surrounding ranches. The cell door opened, and a stern-faced woman entered with a basin of water and a clean dress. "Make yourself presentable," she ordered without sympathy. "You'll fetch a better price looking decent." Josephine's hands trembled as she washed her face, the cool water mixing with silent tears. She had come west with Thomas 3 years ago, full of dreams about their future. Now, she stood to be sold to the highest bidder, possibly to one of the very men Thomas had owed money to, men known for their cruelty and base desires. As noon approached, Josephine was led to a wooden platform erected in the town square, the same place where her husband had been hanged less than 24 hours earlier. A crowd had gathered, mostly men, their eyes assessing her like cattle at market. "We begin the bidding for Mrs. Josephine Daniels, age 24, in good health," the auctioneer announced. "Along with her comes the deed to a small plot of land north of town. Starting bid is $50 to cover the deceased's outstanding debts." "$50, called a gravelly voice from the back. Josephine recognized Frank Millard, the owner of the local saloon and one of Thomas's regular creditors. His eyes roamed over her body with undisguised hunger. "$60, came another voice. "$75, called a third. The bidding continued, rising slowly as men assessed what she might be worth to them as a cook, as a laundress, as something far worse. Josephine stared straight ahead, refusing to meet the eyes of those who would buy her. "$150, called Millard, silencing several of the smaller bidders. "$200, countered a voice from the edge of the crowd. Heads turned to see a tall man leaning against a hitching post, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. As he stepped forward, Josephine could see he was perhaps 30, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and he stood with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and harder decisions. $250, Millard snapped, clearly annoyed at the newcomer's interference. $300, the stranger replied calmly. The crowd murmured. This was far more than a widow typically fetched, especially one whose husband had died in disgrace. $350, Millard growled, his face reddening with anger or perhaps too much morning whiskey. $500, the stranger said, his voice cutting through the whispers of the crowd. A hush fell over the assembled townspeople. $500 was a small fortune in the territory, enough to buy a decent homestead with livestock to spare. The auctioneer looked to Millard, who was calculating furiously, his bloodshot eyes darting between Josephine and the stranger. 500 going once, the auctioneer called. Millard spat in the dust. She ain't worth it, he muttered, stepping back. 500 going twice. Sold to the gentleman for $500. The gavel struck with a crack that seemed to echo through Josephine's very bones. She had been sold her life, her future, her very self to a man whose name she didn't even know. The stranger approached the platform, paid the auctioneer, and received a folded document likely the deed to Thomas's land, and now to Josephine herself. He finally looked directly at her, and to her surprise, his expression held neither triumph nor lechery, but something closer to concern. "My name is Wade Ackerman," he said in a low voice meant only for her. "I know you have no reason to trust me, Mrs. Daniels, but I promise you this: I've purchased your debt, not you. I'm offering you a fresh start, nothing more." Josephine stared at him, searching his face for deceit and finding none. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's discuss that somewhere other than in front of the whole town," he replied, offering his hand to help her down from the platform. With no other choice, Josephine placed her trembling hand in his and stepped down. The crowd began to disperse, some looking disappointed that the spectacle had ended, others seemingly relieved that Millard hadn't won. Wade led her to a small cafe at the edge of the town square, far enough from the curious eyes of the townsfolk. He pulled out a chair for her before seating himself, a gesture of courtesy she hadn't expected. "Coffee?" he asked, signaling to the proprietor. Josephine nodded, still wary but desperate for something warm to chase away the chill that had settled in her bones since Thomas's execution. Once their cups were filled and the proprietor had moved away, Wade spoke. "I arrived in town late last night and heard about what happened to your husband and what was planned for you." His hands wrapped around the coffee cup, strong hands marked with the calluses of a working man. "I've seen similar injustices before. It isn't right." "You spent $500 because something isn't right?" Josephine asked, finding her voice at last. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've made some good investments over the years. I can afford it. What do you want from me?" She asked directly, needing to understand her situation. "Nothing you don't freely choose to give," Wade answered with equal directness. "The way I see it, you have options now. I own a ranch about 2 days' ride from here near Prescott. I need someone to help run the house, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. I'd pay you a fair wage and you'd have your own quarters. Or, if you prefer, I can give you enough money to take the stage to California or back east, wherever you might have family." Josephine stared at him, disbelief warring with desperate hope. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Wade's eyes darkened slightly as he looked into his coffee. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be at the mercy of others and have no good choices." He looked up at her again. "You don't have to decide right now. We can stay in town tonight and you can tell me your decision in the morning. And if I choose to go to your ranch, what happens when you tire of me as your housekeeper? Then you'll have saved enough money to go wherever you please," he said simply. "I'm not offering charity, Mrs. Daniels. I'm offering employment and respect." Josephine took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to study him more carefully. Wade Ackerman was undeniably handsome, with strong features and that quiet confidence that seemed to come naturally to some men. But it was the absence of something in his demeanor that struck her most. He lacked the predatory assessment she'd grown accustomed to from men, especially since Thomas's death. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted finally. No family back east who would welcome me, especially as the widow of a hanged man. Wade nodded, accepting her words without pity. Then you'll come to the ranch. I'll arrange for a room at the hotel for you tonight. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. Josephine spent a restless night in the small but clean hotel room Wade had secured for her. For the first time in years, she was alone with her thoughts, free from Thomas's unpredictable rages and oppressive presence. While she grieved the waste of a human life, she could not honestly mourn the man Thomas had become. Dawn came with streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky. Josephine dressed in the clothes Wade had purchased for her the previous evening, practical garments suited for travel, not the finery some men might have chosen to display their possession. Wade was waiting with 2 horses when she descended the hotel steps. He offered a simple good morning and helped her mount before securing her small bundle of possessions behind the saddle. They rode out of Fort McDowell just as the town was beginning to stir. No one called out farewells. No one seemed to notice or care that Josephine Daniels was leaving. She had been merely a curiosity, the wife of a hanged man, sold at auction, and now that the spectacle was over, the town had moved on to other matters. The journey to Wade's ranch took them through rugged terrain, the beauty of the Arizona wilderness unfolding around them. Wade was not a talkative man, but neither was he cold. He pointed out landmarks, warned her of dangerous spots along the trail, and set an easy pace that wouldn't exhaust her. At their first night's camp, he gave her his bedroll, insisting he was accustomed to sleeping rough. He kept a respectful distance, tending the fire and preparing a simple but satisfying meal. "How did you come to own a ranch in Arizona?" Josephine asked as they sat by the fire, the stars emerging in the vast sky above them. "I came west after the war," Wade replied, referring to the Civil War that had torn the nation apart more than a decade earlier. "Worked as a ranch hand, then a foreman. Saved every penny. 5 years ago, I had enough to buy a small spread when the previous owner decided to return east. It's grown since then." "You fought in the war?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Union cavalry, saw things no man should see." Josephine nodded, understanding there were memories he didn't wish to revisit. "My father and older brother both died at Gettysburg. That's why my mother and I had no choice but to accept Thomas's proposal when he came calling. We were destitute. And your mother?" "Consumption took her the winter before Thomas and I came west." Josephine stared into the flames, the familiar grief washing over her. "He was different then, or perhaps I was simply too naive to see what he truly was." Wade was quiet for a long moment. "People change," he finally said. "War changes them. Hardship changes them. Some grow stronger, some break." "And which were you?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes met hers across the fire, and for a moment she glimpsed something vulnerable beneath his composed exterior. "I'm still figuring that out," he answered honestly. The following day's journey took them deeper into the countryside, the terrain gradually changing from desert scrub to rolling grasslands dotted with pine and juniper. By late afternoon, Wade pointed to a distant ridge. "My land starts there," he said with quiet pride. "The house is just beyond that rise." As they crested the hill, Josephine caught her first sight of what would be her new home. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings stood nearby, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, and smoke rose from the house's chimney. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. A hint of pleasure crossed Wade's face. "It's home." As they approached, A middle-aged man emerged from the barn, followed by two younger cowboys. The older man raised his hand in greeting. "That's Henry Jenkins, my foreman," Wade explained. "The others are Sam and Miguel, two of my hands. There are 4 more out with the herd right now." Wade introduced Josephine as they dismounted, describing her simply as Mrs. Daniels, who will be keeping house for us. If the men were curious about her sudden appearance, they didn't show it, greeting her with polite nods and Madam S before taking their horses. "Martha's been looking after the house," Wade told her as he led her toward the main building. "She's Henry's wife. They live in the small cabin behind the bunkhouse. She'll be glad for the help she's getting on in years." Inside, the house was unexpectedly welcoming. The main floor consisted of a large kitchen with a massive hearth, a dining area big enough to seat a dozen men, and a comfortable sitting room with bookshelves lining one wall. A narrow staircase led to the second floor. "Martha," Wade called. A small, round woman with gray streaked hair appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Josephine. "Martha, this is Mrs. Daniels. She'll be taking over most of the household duties." Martha's surprised expression quickly gave way to one of undisguised relief. "Oh, thank the Lord. These old bones aren't what they used to be, and keeping up with 8 hungry men is no small task." Wade cleared his throat. "Mrs. Daniels has had a difficult journey. Perhaps you could show her to her room and help her get settled." Of course. Martha bustled forward, taking Josephine's arm as if they were old friends. "I've kept the second bedroom at the top of the stairs ready, just in case. It has a lovely view of the mountains." As Martha led her upstairs, chattering about meal schedules and laundry days, Josephine glanced back to see Wade watching them, an unreadable expression on his face. For the first time since Thomas's hanging, she felt something close to hope fluttering in her chest. The room Martha showed her was indeed lovely, spacious and bright, with a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand, a small writing desk, and a rocking chair near the window. It was more than Josephine had dared to expect. "Mr. Ackerman said you'd need some things," Martha said, opening a trunk at the foot of the bed. "I took the liberty of laying out some clothing I thought might fit. They belonged to Mr. Ackerman's sister when she visited last summer." Josephine ran her fingers over the neatly folded dresses and shawls, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I'm very grateful. I'll take good care of them." Martha patted her hand. "You rest a bit. Supper's at 6 sharp. The men come in hungry and Mr. Ackerman likes punctuality." Left alone, Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by how quickly her circumstances had changed. 3 days ago, she had been the wife of a condemned man, facing a future of servitude or worse. Now she found herself in a comfortable home with decent work and a man who, thus far, had shown her nothing but respect. It seemed too good to be true, and that thought gave her pause. In her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. What did Wade Ackerman really want from her? Why had he truly spent such a significant sum to rescue her? Josephine resolved to keep her guard up while she learned more about her benefactor and his intentions. But for now, she allowed herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of washing away the dust of travel in the basin of clean water Martha had provided, and changing into a fresh dress that, while slightly too large, was the nicest garment she'd worn in years. At precisely 6 o'clock, Josephine descended the stairs to find the dining table set for 10 people. Wade stood at the head of the table, deep in conversation with Henry. He looked up as she entered, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, appreciation, perhaps, or surprise at her transformation. "Mrs. Daniels," he said with a slight nod. "I trust you found your accommodation satisfactory?" "Very much so, Mr. Ackerman," Thank you. The cowboys filed in, having washed up after their day's work. They were a diverse group, young and middle-aged, two clearly of Mexican heritage, one with the dark complexion that suggested black ancestry. All were respectful, removing their hats and nodding politely to her before taking their seats. Martha brought out platters of roasted beef, potatoes, and corn bread. The men waited until Wade had seated himself and Josephine before beginning to serve themselves. Conversation flowed easily among the men. Talk of cattle, fencing that needed repair, a mountain lion that had been spotted near the north pasture. Wade participated actively, asking questions and giving instructions. He clearly knew his business and commanded respect without demanding it. Josephine ate quietly, observing the dynamics around the table. This was a well-run operation with a sense of camaraderie she hadn't expected. Even more surprising was how Wade treated his workers not as subordinates, but as valued members of a team. Mrs. Daniels will be taking over most of the cooking and household duties starting tomorrow, Wade announced toward the end of the meal. I expect you'll all make her feel welcome and show her the same respect you'd show me. Murmurs of agreement circled the table. One of the younger cowboys, Sam, she recalled, spoke up. Begging your pardon, madam, but if you cook half as good as Martha, you'll be the most popular lady in 3 counties. This brought chuckles from the others and a playful swat from Martha, who was clearly pleased by the compliment. I'll certainly do my best, Josephine replied with a small smile. After the meal, the men thanked Martha and nodded respectfully to Josephine before filing out to the bunkhouse. Henry and Martha retired to their cabin, leaving Josephine alone with Wade for the first time since their arrival. Would you care to join me on the porch? He asked. The evenings are pleasant this time of year. Josephine hesitated, then nodded. They settled into chairs at the far end of the porch, where the view opened up to the valley below, now silvered by moonlight. Your ranch is impressive, Josephine said after a comfortable silence. You've accomplished a great deal in 5 years. I've been fortunate, Wade replied. Good land, good cattle, good men working for me. And no wife to share it with. The question slipped out before she could stop it. If he was offended by her directness, he didn't show it. No, there was someone once. She didn't care for the idea of life in the territories. His tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. I should explain your duties, he continued, changing the subject. Martha will show you the kitchen and pantry tomorrow. She'll continue to help with the heavier work. Laundry for 8 men is no small task, but the cooking will be primarily your responsibility, along with keeping the main house in order. That seems fair, Josephine agreed. Sundays are quiet days. The men handle only essential chores and we have a late breakfast instead of separate breakfast and lunch. You'll have the afternoon to yourself. He paused. I should mention your wages. I can offer $20 a month plus room and board. Is that acceptable? Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. It was a generous sum for a housekeeper, especially one who had few other options. More than acceptable, Mr. Ackerman. Thank you. Wade, he said. You might as well call me Wade. Mr. Ackerman makes me feel like my father. She smiled despite herself. Then you must call me Josephine. He nodded, and they lapsed into silence again, watching as clouds drifted across the moon. I want you to know, Wade said eventually, his voice low and serious, that your position here is secure regardless of. Well, regardless of anything else. You're free to stay as long as you wish and free to leave when you choose. I meant what I said in Fort McDowell. This is employment, nothing more. Josephine studied him in the dim light, trying to read his intentions. You're a surprising man, Wade Ackerman. A half smile touched his lips. I'll take that as a compliment. The following weeks established a rhythm to Josephine's new life. She rose early to prepare breakfast for the men, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house, and her afternoons preparing the evening meal. The work was demanding but satisfying, and she took pride in keeping Wade's home running smoothly. Martha proved to be a patient teacher and welcome companion. From her, Josephine learned not only about managing the household, but also about the ranch's history and the surrounding area. She discovered that Wade had purchased the property from a discouraged settler who had lost his wife to fever and couldn't bear to stay. "He's built it up something wonderful," Martha told her as they kneaded bread dough side by side. "When he came, there was just the cabin what's now our place and a sorry excuse for a barn. That main house. He designed it himself, had men come from Prescott to help build it. He seems very capable," Josephine observed. Martha chuckled. "That he is. Smartest man I've known, excepting my Henry. Reads everything he can get his hands on. Did you notice the books in the sitting room? Orders them special from back east." Indeed, Josephine had noticed the extensive library and had even borrowed a volume of poetry one evening when her work was done. She had found Wade there, reading by lamplight. He had seemed pleased by her interest, recommending several titles she might enjoy. These quiet evening encounters became a regular occurrence. Sometimes they discussed books, sometimes the day's events around the ranch. Wade never pressed for details about her past, and she afforded him the same courtesy, though her curiosity about him grew with each passing day. As spring turned to early summer, Josephine found herself watching for Wade's return whenever he rode out with the men. She told herself it was simply because he was her employer and benefactor, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when he smiled at her across the dinner table, or their hands brushed accidentally as she poured his coffee. One warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky, Wade broke their comfortable silence. "The county dance is this Saturday in Prescott," he said, his eyes still on the horizon. "I thought you might like to attend. It would be an opportunity to meet some of the other ranching families." Josephine's heart quickened at what sounded remarkably like an invitation. "I'd like that," she said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to cause gossip. A housekeeper accompanying her employer." Wade turned to look at her directly. "You're more than a housekeeper, Josephine." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. "What am I, then?" she asked softly. Wade's gaze was steady. "A friend, I hope. Perhaps something more in time. If you were interested." Josephine felt a blush warming her cheeks. In the 3 months since Wade had purchased her debt, he had never once presumed upon her, never made her feel obligated to him in any way beyond her duties as housekeeper. That he was now suggesting a different relationship moved her deeply. "I am interested," she admitted, "but I'm afraid." "Of me?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "No," she said quickly. "Of making another mistake. My marriage to Thomas was difficult." "I don't trust my own judgment anymore," Wade nodded slowly. "I understand. There's no rush, Josephine. We have time." The county dance became a turning point in their relationship. Wade had arranged for Martha to accompany them as a chaperone, a gesture that earned him Henry's approving nod and Josephine's gratitude. He had also purchased a new dress for her, a lovely blue creation that complemented her eyes without being ostentatious. In Prescott, Wade proudly introduced her to neighboring ranchers and merchants, never once referring to her as his housekeeper. Josephine found herself enjoying the company of other women for the first time since leaving the East, exchanging recipes with ranchers' wives and sharing news. When Wade led her onto the dance floor, his hand warm at her waist, Josephine felt a joy she had nearly forgotten was possible. He moved with surprising grace for a man of his size, guiding her confidently through the steps of the waltz. "You dance beautifully," she told him, a little breathless from both the exertion and his proximity. "My mother insisted all her children learn," he replied with a smile. "Said it was the mark of a civilized person." "Tell me about your family," Josephine urged, realizing how little she knew about his background. As they circled the floor, Wade spoke of growing up in Pennsylvania, the second of 4 children. His father had been a successful merchant who expected his sons to follow him into business. Wade had other ideas, enlisting in the Union Army when the war broke out, much to his father's disapproval. "When I came home, everything had changed," he said, his expression darkening slightly. "My older brother died at Antietam. My father had grown bitter. The business was failing. I couldn't stay. And your mother, your other siblings." "My mother passed 2 years ago. My sister Rebecca is married to a banker in Philadelphia. She visits occasionally. Those were her clothes Martha gave you. My younger brother James runs what's left of the family business. Do you miss them?" Josephine asked. Wade considered this. "Sometimes, but I've built a good life here." His eyes held hers. "It's getting better all the time." The evening ended all too quickly. On the journey back to the ranch, Martha dozed in the wagon bed while Josephine sat beside Wade on the seat, acutely aware of his solid presence next to her in the darkness. "Thank you," she said softly. "I hadn't realized how much I missed such simple pleasures." Wade's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "There will be more evenings like this if you wish." Josephine squeezed his hand in response, her heart too full for words. Summer brought long, busy days on the ranch. Cattle needed moving to higher pastures, fences required constant repair, and the vegetable garden Josephine had started demanded regular attention. Despite the work, she found herself happier than she had been in years. Her relationship with Wade progressed slowly, built on mutual respect and growing affection. He courted her properly, bringing wildflowers from his rides, reading to her in the evenings, taking her on Sunday afternoon picnics by the creek that ran through the property. One such Sunday in late July, they sat beneath a cottonwood tree, the remains of their meal packed away. Josephine was embroidering a handkerchief while Wade read aloud from a book of Tennyson's poems. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, bringing tears to her eyes. Wade noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting the book aside. "Nothing," she assured him, wiping her eyes with embarrassment. "It's just, I never expected to feel this way again. Content. Safe." Wade's expression softened. "I want you to always feel safe with me, Josephine." "I do," she said simply. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." Josephine's heart began to race. "Yes, that land that came with the auction," he began awkwardly. "I've been looking into it. It's not much, 10 acres at the edge of Fort McDowell, but it's legally yours. I had my lawyer draw up the proper papers." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This transfers full ownership to you, free and clear." Josephine stared at the paper, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Wade, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. It's yours by right. I just wanted to make it official." He hesitated, then added, "I want you to have options, Josephine, to never feel trapped again." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she understood the depth of his consideration. Wade wasn't just giving her property. He was giving her independence, the freedom to choose her own path, even if that path led away from him. "You are an extraordinary man," she whispered. Wade's eyes darkened with emotion. "May I kiss you, Josephine?" In answer, she leaned forward, meeting him halfway. His lips were warm against hers, the kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she felt herself melting into his embrace, years of fear and loneliness dissolving in the warmth of his touch. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the night of the dance," he confessed. "I've wanted you to," she admitted with a shy smile. Their courtship intensified after that afternoon, their mutual attraction acknowledged and embraced. Wade remained respectful, never pressing for more than Josephine was ready to give, but their evening conversations on the porch often ended with lingering kisses that left them both yearning for more. August brought a wave of heat that seemed to shimmer above the land. The creek ran low, and the men worked doubly hard to ensure the cattle had access to what water remained. Wade was often gone from dawn till dusk, returning exhausted but always taking time to seek out Josephine, as if drawing strength from her presence. It was during this difficult period that trouble arrived in the form of 3 riders who appeared at the ranch one scorching afternoon, when Wade and most of the hands were checking on the northern herd. Josephine was in the kitchen, preparing dough for the evening's bread, when she heard horses in the yard. Assuming it was Wade returning early, she wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. Instead of Wade's familiar figure, she saw 3 dusty strangers dismounting. The lead rider was a large man with a bushy beard and cold eyes that immediately put Josephine on edge. She recognized him with a jolt of fear: Frank Millard, the saloon owner who had bid on her at the auction in Fort McDowell. "Well, well," he drawled, seeing her in the doorway. "If it ain't Mrs. Daniels herself, looking mighty domestic." Josephine's blood ran cold. "Mr. Millard, what brings you to Ackerman Ranch? Heard you'd settled in real nice here," he said, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Thought I'd come see for myself. Is Ackerman around?" "Mr. Ackerman is out with the herd," she replied, thankful that her voice remained steady. "He's expected back shortly." This was a lie. Wade had mentioned he might be gone until nightfall, but Josephine hoped it might deter whatever Millard had planned. "That's a shame," Millard said, not sounding disappointed at all. "Guess we'll just have to wait for him. Mind if we water our horses?" Without waiting for her answer, he nodded to his companions who led the horses toward the water trough. Millard himself stepped onto the porch, too close for comfort. "Been thinking about you, Mrs. Daniels," he said, his voice dropping. "Been thinking you might have been worth that 500 after all." Josephine took a step back. "Mr. Millard, I suggest you state your business with Mr. Ackerman and be on your way." Millard laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "My business? Well, that's simple enough. Your late husband owed me money more than what Ackerman paid at that auction. I figure either Ackerman can make up the difference or I can take something of equal value." His eyes raked over her again, his meaning unmistakable. "My husband's debts were settled by the auction," Josephine said firmly, though fear knotted her stomach. "Whatever grievance you think you have is with a dead man, not with me or Mr. Ackerman." "That ain't how I see it," Millard growled, advancing another step. Josephine retreated into the house, her mind racing. Henry and Martha were in town for supplies. The only ranch hands nearby were Miguel, who was repairing a fence at the south end of the property, and Sam, who was supposed to be mending tack in the barn. "I'll thank you to stay outside, Mr. Millard," she said, her hand finding the shotgun Wade kept mounted near the door. She had never fired a gun in her life, but Millard didn't need to know that. Millard's eyes narrowed at the sight of the weapon. Now, Mrs. Daniels, no need for that. We're just having a friendly conversation." "I believe the conversation is over," came a new voice, Sam's. The young cowboy stood at the edge of the porch, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. Mr. Ackerman doesn't take kindly to uninvited guests harassing his household. Millard's companions had noticed the confrontation and were moving back toward the house, their hands drifting toward their weapons. 3 against 1, boy, Millard said, his confidence returning. Bad odds. 4 against 3, corrected another voice as Miguel appeared from around the side of the house, a rifle in his hands. And we know this land better than you do. A tense silence fell as the men assessed each other. Josephine's heart hammered in her chest, the shotgun heavy in her inexperienced hands. Finally, Millard spat into the dust. "Tell Ackerman I'll be back to discuss our business properly," he said. "This ain't over." "It is for today," Sam replied steadily. "Mount up and ride out." With a last venomous glance at Josephine, Millard rejoined his companions. They mounted and rode away, dust billowing behind them. As soon as they were out of sight, Josephine's knees gave way and she sank onto a chair, the shotgun clattering to the floor. "You all right, Mrs. Daniels?" Sam asked, concern evident in his young face. "Yes. Thank you, Sam, and you, Miguel. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Miguel nodded gravely. "I saw them from the south field, didn't like the look of them." "I'll ride out and find the boss," Sam decided. "He needs to know about this." "Be careful," Josephine urged. "They might still be nearby." After Sam left, Miguel insisted on staying at the house until the others returned. Josephine was grateful for his solid presence as she tried to continue her daily tasks with trembling hands. Wade returned in a thunderous mood after receiving Sam's news. His face was grim as Josephine recounted her encounter with Millard. "He said Thomas owed him more money," she concluded. "But that can't be right. The auction was supposed to settle all his debts." Wade's jaw tightened. "Millard's lying. The sheriff confirmed all known debts were covered by the auction price. This is something else." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Millard's had a grudge against me since I outbid him." "What will he do?" Josephine asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Wade took her hands in his touch reassuring despite his anger. "Nothing. I won't let him. I'm riding into Prescott tomorrow to speak with the sheriff. In the meantime, I want you to stay close to the house. One of the men will be nearby at all times." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Josephine found herself unable to sleep. The confrontation with Millard had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. When she heard a soft knock at her door, she knew who it was before she opened it. Wade stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, concern etched on his features. "I saw your light," he said softly. "Couldn't sleep," she shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see his face." Wade's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, I should have been here." "Don't," she said quickly. "This isn't your fault. If anything, I'm the one who brought trouble to your doorstep." "Josephine," he said, his voice low and intense, "you are not trouble. You are the best thing that has happened to me in a very long time." The simple declaration broke through the last of her defenses. With a small cry, she stepped into his arms, burying her face against his chest. Wade held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair as she released the tears she'd been holding back. "I can't lose this," she whispered against his shirt. "I can't lose you or this home or the life we're building." Wade tilted her face up to his eyes fierce with determination. "You won't. I promise you that." When he kissed her, it was different from their previous embraces, deeper, more urgent, filled with all the fear and longing the day had stirred in both of them. Josephine responded in kind, her arms twining around his neck as she pressed herself against him. It was Wade who finally pulled back, his breathing ragged. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "This isn't the right time." Josephine knew he was right, but she was reluctant to let him leave. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked. Just sit with me a while, Wade nodded, understanding her need for reassurance. He settled into the chair by her bed while she lay down, his presence a comfort in the darkness. "When this is over," he said softly, "there's something important I want to ask you." Josephine's heart skipped a beat at the promise in his words. "I'll look forward to that conversation," she murmured as sleep finally began to claim her. The next morning, Wade rode to Prescott as planned, taking Sam and 2 other hands with him. He returned late in the evening with mixed news. "The sheriff says he can't do much unless Millard actually commits a crime," he told Josephine as they sat in the kitchen, the house quiet around them. But he did confirm that all of Thomas's documented debts were covered by the auction. Whatever Millard's claiming is fiction. "Then why is he doing this?" Josephine asked. Wade's expression was grim. "Partly because he's the type of man who can't stand to lose, partly because—" He hesitated. "Josephine, there's something I haven't told you about Fort McDowell, about why I was there that day." Josephine waited, sensing this was important. "Millard and I have history," Wade continued. 2 years ago, he tried to force a widow off her land near Fort McDowell, land that adjoined his saloon. He wanted to expand. I happened to be passing through, heard about it, and helped her fight his claim in court. He lost, and he's held a grudge ever since." Wade's eyes met hers. "When I heard about what was happening to you, I couldn't stand by and watch him win." "So you knew who I was when you bid on me," Josephine said slowly, processing this new information. "I knew you were in trouble," Wade corrected. "I knew Millard wanted to hurt you to get to that land. The rest, who you really are, what you've come to mean to me, that I discovered day by day." Josephine was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his words. "What about the land?" she finally asked. "The plot that came with the auction. It's valuable," Wade admitted. "More valuable than most people realize. There's talk of the railroad coming through that area. If it does, that land could be worth 10 times what I paid at the auction. And Millard knows this," Wade nodded. "He's been buying up property all around Fort McDowell. Your husband's land was the last piece he needed for a significant holding." Josephine felt a wave of understanding. "So that's why he's here now. He's still trying to get the land." "Yes, but it's yours now legally. He can't touch it without your consent." Josephine considered this, a plan forming in her mind. "What if we use that to our advantage?" Wade looked at her questioningly. "Let's invite him here," she suggested. "Tell him we're willing to discuss the land. When he comes, the sheriff can be waiting." "It's risky," Wade said, concern evident in his voice. "Millard's unpredictable." "So is life," Josephine replied with newfound resolve. "I'm tired of being afraid, Wade. I want this finished." After much discussion, they refined the plan. Wade sent a message to Millard suggesting a meeting at the ranch in 3 days' time. Meanwhile, he arranged for the sheriff and 2 deputies to arrive early and conceal themselves in the barn. The day of the meeting dawned clear and hot. Josephine dressed with special care in one of the dresses Wade had purchased for her, her hair neatly arranged. If she was going to confront the man who had threatened her, she wanted to do so looking her strongest. Wade had sent the majority of the hands out with the herd, not wanting to risk their safety if things went wrong. Only Henry, Miguel, and Sam remained, positioned strategically around the property. Millard arrived at the appointed hour, flanked by the same 2 men who had accompanied him before. His expression was smug as he dismounted, clearly believing he had the upper hand. "Mrs. Daniels," he greeted her with mock politeness as she met him on the porch. "You're looking well. Life with Ackerman must agree with you." "It does," she replied coolly. "Please come inside, Mr. Millard." "Mr. Ackerman is waiting in the study." Wade stood as they entered, his posture deceptively relaxed, though Josephine could see the tension in his shoulders. "Millard," he said with a nod, Your men can wait outside. Millard smirked. I don't think so, they stay with me. Wade shrugged as if it didn't matter. As you wish. Have a seat. The meeting began civilly enough, with discussion of the land in Fort McDowell and its potential value. Millard made no attempt to hide his interest or his knowledge of the railroad plans. So here's my offer, he said eventually, leaning forward in his chair. $500 for the deed, exactly what Ackerman paid for you. He smiled nastily at Josephine. Seems fair, doesn't it? The land is worth considerably more than that, Wade countered smoothly. Especially with the railroad coming. Millard's eyes narrowed. $750 then, but that's my final offer. I believe, Josephine said, finding her voice, that the decision is mine, Mr. Millard. The land belongs to me now. Millard's face darkened. You wouldn't have anything if Ackerman hadn't interfered. You'd have been working for me in Fort McDowell, paying off your husband's real debts. There were no additional debts, Josephine stated firmly. You're lying, and we both know it. One of Millard's men shifted uncomfortably at this direct accusation, drawing a sharp glance from his employer. Careful, Mrs. Daniels, Millard growled. You're in no position to call me a liar. Actually, came a new voice from the doorway, she's in exactly the right position. The sheriff of Prescott County stepped into the room, his badge gleaming on his chest. Frank Millard, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted extortion and threatening a citizen of this county. Millard leaped to his feet, his hand going for his gun, but Wade was faster. In one fluid motion, he had his revolver trained on Millard's chest. I wouldn't, he advised quietly. The deputies had secured Millard's men outside, leaving the saloon owner isolated and outnumbered. His face contorted with rage as the sheriff approached with handcuffs. This isn't over, he spat at Josephine. You think you've won, but it is over, Wade interrupted, his voice steely. You'll be facing charges in Prescott. If you're lucky, you'll avoid prison. But either way, you'll stay away from Mrs. Daniels and this ranch, or the next time we meet won't end with handcuffs. As the sheriff led Millard away, Josephine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced her fear and emerged stronger. More than that, she had seen the lengths to which Wade would go to protect her and what they were building together. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the ranch had returned to its normal rhythm, Wade asked Josephine to join him for a walk. They strolled along the creek, golden light filtering through the cottonwoods as the sun began its descent. You were remarkable today, Wade told her, his eyes warm with admiration. Not many would have had the courage to face Millard like that. Josephine smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. I had something worth fighting for. Wade stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Josephine, he began, his voice suddenly serious. Before Millard interrupted our lives, I mentioned there was something important I wanted to ask you. Her heart began to race as Wade took her hands in his. These past months with you have shown me what I've been missing all these years, he continued. You've brought warmth and purpose to my life in ways I never expected. I love you, Josephine Daniels. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you've made this house a true home. He took a deep breath. If you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me. Tears of happiness spilled down Josephine's cheeks as Wade knelt before her, still holding her hands. Josephine Daniels, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Wade Ackerman, with all my heart. Wade stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with promise and passion. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. This was my mother's, he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. She made me promise to give it only to a woman of exceptional character and courage. She would have approved of you, Josephine. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Josephine was struck by how far she had come from that terrible day in Fort McDowell. From the widow of a hanged man, auction-like property, to a woman cherished and respected with a future bright with possibility. "When would you like to be married?" Wade asked as they walked back toward the house, hand in hand. Josephine considered this. "Soon," she decided. "I don't want to wait. Perhaps in Prescott with a proper ceremony." Wade smiled down at her. "Whatever you wish. Though I should warn you, my sister Rebecca will insist on coming from Philadelphia, and she'll bring enough trunks to fill the house." Josephine laughed, delighting in the thought of family, of belonging. "I look forward to meeting her, and to being Mrs. Ackerman." Wade's arm tightened around her waist. "Not as much as I look forward to making you my wife." They were married on a bright September morning in Prescott's small church, with wildflowers decorating the altar and sunshine streaming through the windows. Wade's sister Rebecca had indeed arrived with numerous trunks, but also with warm embraces for the woman her brother had chosen. The ranch hands attended in their Sunday best, with Henry serving as Wade's best man and Martha standing proudly beside Josephine. Even the sheriff came, tipping his hat respectfully to the bride. As Josephine spoke her vows, her voice clear and confident, she felt the last shadows of her past life falling away. Wade's eyes never left hers as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the church. Their first kiss as husband and wife was met with cheers and applause, Henry's booming voice leading the celebration. The reception that followed at the town's best hotel was a joyous affair, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. When Wade finally swept her away to the hotel's finest room, Josephine went willingly into the arms of the man who had given her a second chance at life and love. "Mrs. Ackerman," Wade murmured against her lips as he carried her over the threshold. "I've waited so long to call you that." "Not as long as I've waited to be truly loved," she whispered back, her heart overflowing with happiness. Their wedding night was everything Josephine had dreamed it might be: tender and passionate, filled with discoveries and whispered promises. Wade was a patient and generous lover, ensuring her pleasure before seeking his own. In his arms, Josephine found a completion she had never known was possible, their bodies joining as their hearts had already done. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay tangled in the sheets with moonlight painting silver patterns across their skin, Wade traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Beyond words," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his palm. "I never thought I could feel this way." "This is just the beginning," Wade promised, drawing her closer. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." They returned to the ranch 2 days later to find the hands had prepared a surprise, a large banner reading, "Welcome home, Mrs. Ackerman," stretched across the porch, and a feast laid out in the dining room. Martha had outdone herself with a 3-layer cake, and even Miguel's usually serious face was split with a grin. Life settled into a new, sweeter rhythm. Josephine continued to manage the household, but now as the ranch's mistress rather than its housekeeper. Wade included her in decisions about the property, respecting her growing knowledge of the business. Together, they discussed the future of the ranch and their hopes for expanding both the herd and the house. Winter came with a blanket of snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland. The ranch house, with its roaring fires and Josephine's touches of comfort everywhere, became a haven against the cold. Christmas was celebrated with gifts and feasting, Wade presenting Josephine with a beautiful piano he had ordered months earlier from St. Louis. "I remember you mentioning you played as a girl," he said as she ran her fingers reverently over the keys. "I thought you might enjoy teaching our children someday." Josephine's eyes widened at his words. "Wade," she said softly, "I may not have to wait for someday to teach them." It took him a moment to understand her meaning. When he did, joy transformed his features. "Josephine," he breathed, kneeling beside her. "Are you certain?" She nodded, taking his hand and pressing it to her still flat stomach. "The doctor in Prescott confirmed it last week. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Wade gathered her into his arms, his joy too great for words. Later that night, he held her with exquisite tenderness, his hand often straying to rest protectively over the place where their child grew. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. Calves dotted the pastures, wildflowers carpeted the hills, and Josephine's body changed with the season, her belly rounding as their child developed. Wade was attentive to her every need, insisting she rest when she tried to do too much, bringing her whatever food she craved, no matter how strange the combination. It was during this peaceful time that a letter arrived from Fort McDowell. The railroad company was indeed planning a route through the area and was offering to purchase Josephine's land for a substantial sum, nearly 20 times what Wade had paid at the auction. "What do you think?" Wade asked as they discussed the offer on the porch, Josephine comfortably settled in a rocking chair Wade had crafted for her. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "that the money could secure our child's future and perhaps help some other woman in a difficult situation." Wade squeezed her hand, understanding her meaning. "A foundation, perhaps, to assist widows or women in need." Josephine nodded, her face glowing with purpose. "Yes, something good should come from what happened to me, a way to turn darkness into light." They accepted the railroad's offer, establishing the Daniels Ackerman Foundation with the proceeds. Through careful management and Wade's business acumen, the foundation grew to support women throughout the territory, providing shelter, education, and opportunity. In late summer, as golden light bathed the land and crickets sang in the tall grass, Josephine gave birth to a son. They named him William Thomas Ackerman, William for Wade's father, and Thomas as a reminder of the journey that had brought them together. "He has your eyes," Wade whispered as he held his son for the first time, wonder and love suffusing his features. "And your stubborn chin," Josephine teased gently, exhausted but radiantly happy. As William grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Wade added more land, built a larger barn, and hired additional hands. Josephine managed the expanding household with calm efficiency, finding time to play the piano in the evenings and teach young William his letters. On their second wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Josephine with a trip to San Francisco, her first visit to a major city since coming west. They left William in Martha's capable care and spent a glorious week exploring the bustling metropolis, attending the theater, dining in fine restaurants, and walking along the bay. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked one evening as they watched the sunset from their hotel balcony. "The way we met, the circumstances that brought you here." Josephine considered his question carefully. "I regret Thomas's choices and the pain they caused. I regret that the law allowed me to be treated as property." She turned to face him, her eyes clear and honest. "But I could never regret finding you, Wade. You saved more than my life that day. You saved my faith in humanity, in the possibility of happiness." Wade drew her into his arms, his kiss a silent promise of continued devotion. They returned to the ranch refreshed and more deeply in love than ever. The years that followed brought more children: a daughter, Rebecca Martha, born 2 years after William, and twin boys, James Henry and Michael Samuel, 2 years after that. The Ackerman Ranch became known throughout the territory as a model operation, its owner respected for his fair dealings and innovative practices. Josephine's foundation grew as well, eventually establishing a school for girls and a training program that taught useful skills to women in need. As their children grew, so did their legacy. William showed an early interest in ranching, following Wade everywhere from the time he could walk. Rebecca inherited her mother's musical talent and her father's head for business. The twins, different in temperament but united in mischief, kept the household lively and laughing. On the 10th anniversary of the day Wade had purchased Josephine's debt at auction, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. The ranch had grown to 3 times its original size. The house expanded to accommodate their family, the operation prosperous beyond what either could have imagined. 10 years, Josephine mused, leaning against her husband's solid strength. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times it's as if I've always been here with you. Wade's arm tightened around her waist. Best bid I ever made, he said, his voice rich with contentment, though I got far more than I bargained for. Josephine turned in his embrace, her face upturned to his. At 34, she was more beautiful to him than ever, her face lined only slightly with the evidence of laughter and life fully lived. I love you, Wade Ackerman, she said simply. Thank you for my life. Our life, he corrected gently, bending to kiss her. And it's only just beginning. As the sun set over the Arizona hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the darkest moment of her life, standing on an auction block as men bid for the right to own her, to this perfect peace, surrounded by love and purpose. Wade had promised her a fresh start that day in Fort McDowell, but he had given her so much more. He had given her a home, a family, and most precious of all, a love that had healed wounds she had thought would never mend. The woman who had once been auctioned after her husband's hanging was gone. In her place stood Josephine Ackerman, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected member of her community. A woman who had turned tragedy into triumph, and who would spend the rest of her days ensuring others had the same opportunity for redemption and joy that she had found in the arms of a good man with the courage to bid high on a desperate chance.